The hammer struck the anvil with such perfect rhythm that even the sparrows stopped their morning songs to listen. And when Nathan Wyatt first heard that sound echoing from the old forge on the edge of Wichita, Kansas, he knew something remarkable was happening inside those weathered wooden walls. It was the spring of 1876, and Nathan had been trailing cattle north from Texas for 3 weeks when his bay gelding threw a shoe just outside town. He had meant to take the horse straight to old Jeremiah's blacksmith shop on Main Street, but the sound of that hammer drew him like a lodestone draws iron. The strikes were too precise, too confident, too different from the heavy-handed work he had heard from 100 forges across the frontier. He dismounted and led his horse toward the open door of what everyone in Wichita called the abandoned Henderson place, though apparently it was abandoned no longer. The woman standing at the forge wore leather gloves that reached past her elbows and a heavy apron over a simple cotton dress. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back in a thick braid that hung down past her shoulder blades, and sweat glistened on her face despite the cool morning air. She held a piece of glowing metal with tongs in her left hand, while her right wielded the hammer with movements so fluid they seemed almost like dancing. Nathan watched as she turned the metal, struck it 3 times, turned it again, struck twice more, then plunged it into the water bucket with a hiss of steam that rose around her like morning fog. She looked up then and saw him standing there with his horse, and her eyes were the color of honey held up to sunlight. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Nathan felt something shift inside his chest like tectonic plates finding new positions after years of stillness. "You need something, cowboy?" Her voice was direct but not unfriendly, with an accent that spoke of Boston or perhaps Philadelphia, somewhere far from this Kansas prairie town. Nathan cleared his throat and gestured to his gelding. "Horse threw a shoe about a mile back. Heard your hammer and thought maybe you could help, though I am sorry for the assumption. I can take him to Jeremiah's if you would prefer." The woman pulled off her gloves and walked closer, her movements efficient and purposeful. She lifted the horse's hoof without hesitation, examining it with the practiced eye of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. "Jeremiah does not work anymore," she said, setting the hoof down gently. "His hands shake too badly these days, though he will not admit it to anyone. I have been doing most of the work in town for the past 2 months, but people still go to his shop because they cannot quite believe a woman can forge iron." "Can you?" Nathan asked, then immediately regretted how the question sounded. "I mean, I am not doubting. I can forge iron better than any blacksmith in 3 counties, she said, and there was no boast in her voice, only plain facts stated as plainly as saying the sky was blue. "I learned from my father, who learned from his father, who learned from a master smith in Edinburgh. I have been working iron since I was 12 years old. That is 14 years of experience, in case you are wondering." Nathan did some quick arithmetic and realized she was 26, which made her 3 years younger than himself. "I am not wondering about your ability," he said honestly. "I heard that hammer from a quarter-mile away, and I know good work when I hear it. What I am wondering is why you are working out of an abandoned building instead of charging what you are worth in a proper shop." Something flickered across her face then, something that might have been surprise or might have been the beginning of respect. "Because Jeremiah charges 50 cents for a set of shoes, and the men in this town will not pay a woman the same rate no matter how good her work is. They offer me 30 cents and act like they are being generous." Nathan felt anger kindle in his stomach, the kind of anger that had gotten him into more than one fight over the years. He had always despised unfairness in any form, had broken ties with his own father over the man's treatment of hired hands, had spent 6 months in a Wyoming jail for defending a Chinese railroad worker from 3 drunken bullies. The idea that this woman, who clearly possessed extraordinary skill, was being cheated simply because of her sex made his jaw clench. "Then they are fools," he said flatly. "How much do you charge?" 50 cents for a full set," she said, watching him carefully as if waiting for him to laugh or walk away. 75 if the work is complicated, more if you need custom pieces. My horse needs 1 shoe, maybe 2 if you think the others look worn. I will pay you $1 if you can have him ready by afternoon. I have business in town that will take a few hours." Her eyes widened slightly. "That is more than fair payment for the work." "Fair is getting what something is worth," Nathan said, "and if your work is as good as that hammer song suggested, then $1 is exactly what it is worth. Maybe more, but I am traveling on limited funds at the moment." The woman studied him for a long moment, and Nathan had the distinct impression he was being evaluated in ways that had nothing to do with money or horseshoes. Finally, she nodded. "I am Theresa Pritchard. People call me Tess, though my father always insisted on Theresa because he said it sounded more dignified. I will have your horse ready by 2 o'clock this afternoon, and the work will be good enough that you will want to send every cowboy you know to my forge." "Nathan Wyatt," he replied, extending his hand. When she took it, her grip was firm, and her palm was calloused in the way that spoke of real labor, the kind that built things instead of just destroying them. "And I believe you, Miss Pritchard, though I am wondering why you are all the way out here, instead of somewhere like Dodge City or Abilene, where people might be more willing to pay what you deserve." Theresa released his hand and walked back toward the forge, picking up her gloves. "Because my father died here 6 months ago, and he left me this building and the equipment inside it. Because I buried him in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the river, and I am not ready to leave him yet. Because I thought maybe in a small town, people would be willing to give a woman a chance if she proved herself capable. I was wrong about that last part, but I am not wrong about my skill, and eventually this town will figure that out." Nathan heard the grief in her voice, buried under the determination and pride, and he recognized it because he carried his own share of losses. His mother dead from cholera when he was 16. His younger brother killed in the war before he was old enough to shave. His best friend shot in the back over a card game in an Abilene saloon. The frontier was full of people running from ghosts or toward new lives, and often those two things were the same. "I am sorry about your father," he said simply. "And for what it is worth, I think you are right about them figuring it out eventually. Good work speaks for itself, no matter who does it." She looked at him again with those honey-colored eyes, and Nathan felt that shift in his chest once more, stronger this time. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You can leave your horse. I will take good care of him." Nathan handed over the reins and walked back toward the main street of Wichita, but his mind stayed at that forge with the woman who could make iron sing. The town of Wichita in 1876 was a bustling cattle town, still rough around the edges but growing more civilized with each passing year. The railroad had arrived 5 years earlier, and with it came an influx of settlers, merchants, and the kind of people who saw opportunity in the wide Kansas prairie. Main Street was lined with wooden buildings, some painted and some still showing bare lumber, weathered gray by sun and wind. There was a general store, a hotel, 3 saloons, a bank, a church, and the usual assortment of businesses that sprang up wherever money flowed from the cattle trade. Nathan made his way to the land office first, conducting the business that had brought him to Wichita in the first place. He was looking into buying property about 15 miles west of town, 160 acres with water rights and good grass for cattle. He had spent 12 years working for other men, saving every dollar he could spare, and now he finally had enough to start his own ranch. The land agent, a bespectacled man named Morrison, showed him maps and deed papers, quoted prices, and talked about property lines until Nathan's head spun with details. "You will want to see the land yourself before you commit," Morrison said, rolling up the maps. "But I can tell you that it is good property. The previous owner moved back east after his wife died, could not stand the loneliness of the prairie. You seem like the kind of man who would not mind the isolation." "I have been sleeping under stars for most of my adult life," Nathan replied. "A house and 160 acres sounds like luxury to me." After the land office, he stopped at the general store to replenish his supplies, then got a meal at a small restaurant run by a German woman who served the best fried chicken he had tasted in months. It was past 1 o'clock when he finally made his way back toward the Henderson place, and he told himself it was just about picking up his horse, nothing more. But he knew he was lying to himself, even as he thought it. Theresa was finishing up the second shoe when he arrived, and Nathan stood in the doorway watching her work. She heated the iron until it glowed the exact right shade of red, shaped it on the anvil with precise hammer strikes, cooled it, reheated it, and shaped it again until the curve was perfect. Then she filed the edges smooth, checked the fit against the hoof, made a tiny adjustment, and checked again. The whole process was mesmerizing, a combination of strength and delicacy that Nathan had rarely seen in any craft. When she finally nailed the shoe in place and set down his horse's hoof, she straightened and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "All done. He should carry you wherever you need to go without any problems." Nathan examined the work, and even with his limited knowledge, he could tell it was exceptional. The shoes fit perfectly, The nails were placed exactly right, and the whole job had a professional quality that exceeded anything he had seen from most farriers. "This is excellent work, Miss Pritchard, better than I expected, and my expectations were already high." She smiled then, a real smile that lit up her face, and made her even more beautiful than she had been before. "I told you I was good." "You did indeed." Nathan pulled out a silver dollar and pressed it into her hand. "And you were not exaggerating even a little bit." Theresa looked down at the coin, then back up at him. "Will you be in Wichita long, Mr. Wyatt?" "Nathan, please. And yes, I am looking at buying land west of here. If the property looks as good in person as it does on paper, I will be settling in the area, building a ranch, raising cattle, trying to make something permanent for once in my life." "That sounds like a good plan," she said, and there was something wistful in her voice. "My father always talked about permanence, about building something that would last beyond his own lifetime. He wanted to establish a smithy that could serve this whole region, train apprentices, create a legacy. Then he caught pneumonia during a late winter storm, and 3 days later, he was gone. All his plans disappeared with him." "Not all of them," Nathan said gently. "You are still here, still working his forge, still building what he wanted to build. That counts for something." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "I appreciate you saying that. Most people in town act like I am just a temporary nuisance, someone who will eventually give up and go away. They do not understand that this is my life, not just a passing fancy." Nathan wanted to reach out and touch her hand, wanted to tell her that he understood exactly what she meant, but they had only just met and such gestures would be inappropriate. Instead, he said, "If I do buy that land, I am going to need someone who can do metalwork, hinges, nails, tools, eventually branding irons and wagon repairs and 100 other things. I would like to hire you for that work, if you are willing." Theresa's eyes went wide. "You are serious?" "Completely serious. I have been working with cattle and horses long enough to know that good metalwork is essential, and I have been cheated by enough shoddy blacksmiths to know that quality is worth paying for. If you are as good at making tools and hardware as you are at shoeing horses, then I want to do business with you. Regular business, at fair prices." She bit her lip, and Nathan could see her fighting back tears. "That would change everything for me. If I had regular work from even 1 or 2 ranches, I could make enough to really establish myself here. I could buy better equipment, maybe hire someone to help with the heavy work, actually compete with Jeremiah's shop on equal terms." "Then consider yourself hired," Nathan said, "assuming the land works out and I can close the deal. When will you know?" "I am riding out there tomorrow morning to see the property. If it looks good, I will be back in town by late afternoon to sign the papers. After that, I need to get back to Texas to settle some affairs and collect my things. But I should be back in Kansas within a month. We can work out the details of what I need and what you can provide." Theresa extended her hand again, and this time, when Nathan took it, he held on just a moment longer than necessary. "I will be here," she said firmly, "and I will have designs ready to show you for anything you might need. Gates, hinges, hardware, whatever you can imagine. I promise you will not regret this." "I do not think I will," Nathan said, and he meant it in ways that had nothing to do with metalwork. He left Wichita the next morning, with sunrise painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. The land he wanted to see was about 2 hours' ride west, following a creek that would provide year-round water for cattle. The property agent had given him detailed directions, and Nathan found the place without difficulty. It was even better than Morrison had described, with rolling grassland, a few stands of cottonwood trees along the creek, and a small rise that would be perfect for building a house where you could see for miles in every direction. Nathan spent 3 hours riding the boundaries, checking the water sources, examining the grass and soil, looking for any problems that might make the land less valuable than it appeared. He found nothing but promise. This was exactly the kind of place where a man could build a life, raise cattle, maybe even start a family if he was lucky enough to find the right woman. An image of auburn hair and honey-colored eyes flashed through his mind, and he pushed it away firmly. He had known Theresa Pritchard for less than a day. It was far too early to be thinking such thoughts, but the thoughts kept coming anyway as he rode back to Wichita. He signed the papers that afternoon, handing over a bank draft that represented 12 years of savings and turning himself from an itinerant cowboy into a landowner. Morrison shook his hand and wished him luck, And Nathan walked out of the land office feeling like his whole life had just pivoted in a new direction. He owned 160 acres of Kansas prairie. He was going to build a ranch. He was going to put down roots for the first time since leaving his family's farm in Missouri over a decade ago. He should have been thinking about cattle breeds and building materials and water pumps, but instead he found himself walking toward the Henderson place once more. Theresa was working when he arrived, this time on what looked like a complex hinge assembly. She had several pieces of metal laid out on her workbench, each one apparently part of a larger whole that only she could see in her mind. When she noticed him in the doorway, she set down her tools and smiled. "Did you buy the land?" "I did. I am officially a landowner as of about an hour ago." "Congratulations," she said, and her smile grew wider. "That means we are officially in business together." "It does." Nathan stepped further into the forge, looking at the pieces she had been working on. "What is this you are making?" "It is a special hinge design for the church," she explained, picking up one of the pieces. "The Reverend's wife asked me to make something decorative for the new doors they are installing. She offered me $3 for the set, which is more than fair, and she said if the work is good, she will recommend me to everyone she knows. It is the first real commission I have gotten in town." Nathan examined the metalwork and was impressed by the intricacy of the design. Theresa had incorporated a subtle cross pattern into the metal, along with flowing lines that suggested both strength and grace. "This is artistic work, not just functional. You have real talent." She looked pleased by the compliment. "My father used to say that any blacksmith can make something that works, but a true craftsman makes something that works beautifully. He taught me to take pride in every piece, no matter how small or simple." "He taught you well." Nathan set the piece down carefully. "Listen, I need to head back to Texas in the next few days to settle my affairs and collect my belongings. But I was wondering if, before I leave, you might allow me to buy you dinner? I know we just met, and I do not want to presume anything, but I would like to get to know you better, if you are amenable to that." Theresa looked surprised, then thoughtful, then something that might have been hopeful. "You want to have dinner with me?" "Very much so. Even though I am a blacksmith who spends her days covered in soot and smelling like smoke and metal. Especially because you are a blacksmith who spends her days creating beautiful, functional things with your own 2 hands," Nathan said honestly. "I have spent most of my life around cowboys and cattle. Believe me when I say that soot and smoke are considerable improvements over some of the smells I'm used to." She laughed at that, a genuine laugh that made Nathan's heart do strange things in his chest. "All right then. I would like to have dinner with you, Nathan Wyatt. When were you thinking?" "Tonight, if you are free. I know a day's notice is not much, but I have a limited window before I need to head south." "Tonight works for me," Theresa said. "There is a decent restaurant on 2nd Street, run by a widow named Sarah Kemp. She makes excellent roast beef and vegetables. And her apple pie is the best in town. Would 7 o'clock suit you?" "7 o'clock sounds perfect." Nathan left the forge feeling lighter than he had in years, as if some weight he had been carrying had suddenly become bearable. He spent the rest of the afternoon buying supplies for his trip to Texas, then went back to his hotel room to wash up and change into his better clothes. He had one good shirt without any patches or stains, one pair of trousers that were not worn through at the knees, and a vest his mother had made for him before she died. He brushed the trail dust from his hat and polished his boots until they shone. When he looked at himself in the small mirror above the wash basin, he saw a sun-weathered cowboy with dark hair that needed cutting and brown eyes that had seen too much of the world's harsh edges. He hoped Theresa would see something worth looking at. He met her at 7 o'clock in front of Sarah Kemp's restaurant, and when she arrived, he almost did not recognize her. She wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes, and her auburn hair was arranged in a style that was both practical and pretty. She had scrubbed away the soot and smoke smell, and now she smelled like lavender soap and something else he could not quite identify, but found entirely appealing. "You look beautiful," he said, and meant it completely. She blushed slightly. "Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself." The restaurant was about half full with other diners, and Sarah Kemp herself showed them to a table near the window where they could watch the evening foot traffic on the street. The food was as good as Theresa had promised. The roast beef tender and flavorful, the vegetables fresh despite it being early in the season. They talked while they ate, and Nathan found himself telling her things he rarely shared with anyone. He told her about growing up on a Missouri farm, about how his father had been a hard man who believed that affection was weakness and kindness was wasted on anyone who worked for wages. He told her about his mother, who had been gentle and loving despite her difficult marriage, and who had died trying to nurse sick neighbors during a cholera outbreak. He told her about his brother Samuel, who had lied about his age to join the Union Army at 15 and died at Shiloh before he turned 16. He told her about leaving home at 17 after his father beat a hired hand so badly the man nearly died, and about the years of drifting that had followed. "I have been looking for something permanent ever since I left Missouri," he said. "Somewhere I could build instead of just moving through. I worked on ranches in Texas, Colorado, Wyoming, Nevada. I drove cattle up the Chisholm Trail 4 times, worked as a horse breaker, even spent 6 months as a deputy marshal in a little town in New Mexico. But nothing ever felt like it was mine, you know? Nothing felt like home." "And you think this land here might become home?" Theresa asked gently. "I think it could be. It has potential at least. Good grass, good water, room to grow. And the town seems decent enough, once you get past the stubborn fools who will not pay a talented blacksmith what she is worth." Theresa smiled at that. "Tell me about Texas. I have never been further south than Kansas City." So Nathan told her about the wide open spaces of Texas, about cattle herds that stretched for miles, about thunderstorms that rolled across the plains like ocean waves, about sunsets that painted the whole sky in impossible colors. He told her about the Mexican vaqueros who had taught him to rope and ride, about the Comancheros he had met in border towns, about watching wild mustangs run across the prairie like living wind. Then it was her turn, and Theresa told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about a childhood spent in her father's smithy, learning the trade alongside boys who resented her presence. She told him about her mother, who had died when Theresa was 8, and about how her father had never remarried because he said no woman could replace the love of his life. She told him about the decision to move west after a factory fire destroyed their shop and killed 2 of her father's apprentices, about the journey to Kansas and the hope of starting fresh in a place where the past did not weigh so heavily. "My father had this dream," she said, her voice soft with memory. "He wanted to build something important, something that would matter. He used to say that civilization was built on good metalwork, that every building and bridge and railroad and farm implement depended on someone who knew how to forge iron properly. He thought that out here on the frontier, a truly skilled blacksmith could make a real difference." "He was right about that," Nathan said. "And you are carrying on his dream, whether the fools in this town recognize it or not." "Sometimes I wonder if I am being stubborn to the point of stupidity," Theresa admitted. "I could probably find work in a bigger city, somewhere more progressive where people might be willing to hire a woman smith. But leaving feels like abandoning everything my father worked for, everything he believed in. It feels like admitting defeat." Nathan reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture feeling both bold and completely natural. "It is not defeat to stay and fight for what you believe in. That is the opposite of defeat. That is courage." She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face. "I am glad you rode into town with a loose horseshoe, Nathan Wyatt." "So am I, Theresa Pritchard. So am I." They sat there for another hour, talking about everything and nothing, until Sarah Kemp started giving them pointed looks that suggested it was time to let other customers have the table. Nathan paid for the meal over Theresa's protests that she could pay her own way, and then he walked her back toward the Henderson place through streets lit by lamplight and a rising moon. "How long will you be gone?" she asked when they reached the door of her forge. 3 weeks, maybe 4 at the most. I need to collect my things, sell my horse and saddle to someone who will treat them well, say goodbye to a few people. Then I will head back up here and start building in earnest. "I will have designs ready for you when you return," Theresa promised. "Hinges, latches, hooks, nails, whatever you need for construction. And I will start thinking about branding iron designs, though I suppose you need to figure out your brand first." "I have been thinking about that, actually. Something simple but distinctive, maybe a W inside a circle." "The Circle W Ranch," Theresa said, testing how it sounded. "I like it, strong and straightforward, like the man who owns it." Nathan felt heat rise in his face at the compliment. "I am not sure I am all that strong or straightforward, but I appreciate the sentiment." They stood there in the moonlight, neither quite ready to say goodbye, both aware that 3 or 4 weeks was a long time when you had just found something that felt important. Finally, Nathan did something he had been wanting to do all evening. He leaned forward slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she wanted to, and kissed her softly on the lips. It was a brief kiss, gentle and questioning, and when he pulled back, Theresa's eyes were wide and her cheeks were flushed. "That was forward of me," Nathan said. "I apologize if I overstepped." "You did not overstep," Theresa said quietly. "Not even a little bit." "Good, because I would very much like to do that again when I get back from Texas, if you are willing." "I am willing," she said and smiled. "Very willing. You should go now, before I do something equally forward." Nathan tipped his hat to her. "Until I return, then. Take care of yourself, Theresa Pritchard." "You too, Nathan Wyatt. Travel safe." He walked back to his hotel feeling like he was floating 6 inches above the ground, and when he lay down in his narrow bed that night, he could not stop thinking about honey-colored eyes and the taste of that brief kiss. The trip to Texas took 8 days of hard riding, and Nathan spent every mile thinking about what he was riding toward instead of what he was leaving behind. He had spent 5 years working for the Double T Ranch outside of Austin, and the owner, Thomas Tucker, was a fair man who had taught Nathan most of what he knew about running a cattle operation. When Nathan told him about the Kansas land and his plans to start his own ranch, Tucker was genuinely happy for him. "You have been ready for your own place for a while now," Tucker said, shaking Nathan's hand. "I am going to miss having you around, but I would never stand in the way of a man bettering himself. You need any advice or help getting started, you write me, and I will do what I can." Nathan sold his horse to one of the younger ranch hands, a kid named Jimmy, who had always admired the bay gelding and promised to treat him well. He sold his saddle and most of his tack, keeping only what he could carry in a single pack. He collected his back wages, said goodbye to the men he had worked alongside, and then made one final stop before leaving Texas. His brother Samuel was buried in a military cemetery outside of Memphis, Tennessee, but Nathan had never been able to visit the grave. Instead, he went to the small Baptist church where his mother was buried and spent an hour sitting beside her headstone, telling her about Kansas and the ranch, and the woman who could forge iron better than any man he had ever met. "I think you would like her, Mama," he said softly, tracing his fingers over the carved letters of her name. "She is strong and smart and talented, and she does not let anyone tell her what she can or cannot do. She reminds me of you in a lot of ways. I know it is early to be thinking serious thoughts, but I cannot help it. Something about her just feels right." The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and Nathan chose to believe it was his mother's way of giving her blessing. He left Missouri the next day and headed north, this time with a pack horse carrying everything he owned in the world and a heart full of anticipation. The journey back to Kansas took 9 days because he did not push as hard, and when he finally rode into Wichita on a warm afternoon in late May, the first place he went was the Henderson place. Theresa was at the forge, working on what looked like a gate hinge, and when she saw him in the doorway, she set down her hammer and ran to him. Nathan barely had time to dismount before she threw her arms around his neck, and he caught her and held her close, breathing in the smell of smoke and metal and lavender soap that was already becoming familiar. "You came back?" she said against his shoulder. "Did you think I would not?" "I hoped you would, but I was afraid maybe you would get to Texas and remember some girl you left behind, or decide that Kansas was too far from everything you knew, or just change your mind about settling down." Nathan pulled back enough to look at her face. "There is no girl in Texas or anywhere else. And, as for changing my mind, the only thing I changed was how fast I rode to get back here. I could not stop thinking about you the entire time I was gone." "I could not stop thinking about you either," Theresa admitted. "I told myself I was being foolish, that we barely knew each other, that I should be focused on my work and not on some cowboy who rode into town and said pretty words. But every time I was at the forge, I kept imagining you walking through that door. I am here now," Nathan said, "and I am planning to stay. Show me what you have been working on." Over the next hour, Theresa showed him dozens of designs she had drawn up for ranch hardware. There were hinges in 3 different sizes, each one sturdy and well-proportioned. There were gate latches that could be operated with one hand while on horseback. There were hooks for hanging tools and tack, nails in various sizes, brackets for shelving and support beams. She had even drawn up several possible designs for branding irons with the Circle W mark he had mentioned. "This is incredible work," Nathan said, studying the careful drawings. How long did all this take you? I worked on it every evening after I finished my regular jobs. I wanted to be ready when you came back. She looked at him with something vulnerable in her expression. I wanted you to know that I took this seriously, that I was committed to doing good work for you. I never doubted that for a moment. Nathan set down the drawings and took both her hands in his. Theresa, I need to tell you something, and I'm just going to say it plain because I am not good with fancy words. I have been thinking about you constantly for 3 weeks. I rode back here as fast as I could because I could not stand being away from you any longer. I know we have only known each other for a short time, and I know this is probably too fast and too forward, but I need you to know that I am serious about you, about us, if you feel the same way. Theresa's eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. I feel the same way. I have been trying to convince myself that I was being ridiculous, but every time I thought about you not coming back, I felt like something vital was missing. I barely know you, Nathan Wyatt, but somehow I feel like I have been waiting for you my whole life. He kissed her then, not gentle and questioning like before, but deep and passionate, pouring all the longing and hope and fear of the past 3 weeks into that single moment. She kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands coming up to tangle in his hair, her body pressed against his in a way that made his heart race and his breath come short. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan said, I need to start building my ranch house, but I want to do it right. I want to build something that will last, something that could be a real home for a family. And Theresa, I know it is too soon to ask certain questions, but I need you to know that when I am imagining that home, you are in it. You are in every version of the future I can see. How long will it take you to build? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. If I work hard and hire help when I need it, maybe 3 months to get a house and barn up. Another month or 2 to get the property really functional. By fall, I could have a working ranch. And then what? And then I am going to ask you to marry me, Nathan said simply. I am telling you now, so you have time to think about it, time to decide if that is something you might want. I am not going to pressure you or rush you, but I am also not going to hide what I am feeling. I think you are remarkable, Theresa Pritchard, and I want to build a life with you. Theresa was crying now, tears running down her cheeks even as she smiled. You do not need to wait until fall to ask me. The answer is already yes. Nathan's heart felt like it might burst right out of his chest. You are sure? You really want to marry a dusty cowboy with more ambition than sense? I want to marry a good man who sees me for who I am, who values my work and my dreams, who kisses me like I am the most precious thing in the world. Yes, Nathan, I am sure. I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in my entire life. He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less meaningful. Then, I guess I better build us a proper house instead of just a bachelor cabin. Something with room to grow, room for children eventually, if we are blessed. Room for a workshop too, Theresa added, because I am not giving up my blacksmithing just because I am getting married. That work is part of who I am. I would never ask you to give it up, Nathan assured her. In fact, I am counting on you to do all the metalwork for the ranch. You are going to be an essential part of the whole operation, partner. Partner, Theresa repeated, testing the word. I like the sound of that. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans, their words tumbling over each other in excitement. Nathan would start building immediately, working from dawn to dusk to get the house and barn up before summer turned to fall. Theresa would continue working at her forge, building up capital, and creating the hardware Nathan would need. They would get married as soon as the house was finished, a simple ceremony with just a few witnesses. After that, they would work together to build the Circle W Ranch into something that would last generations. As the sun began to set and the light inside the forge turned golden, Nathan pulled Theresa close once more. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For taking a chance on a stranger with a lame horse. For being brave enough to forge your own path, even when everyone said you could not. For saying yes when I barely had the courage to ask. For being exactly who you are. Theresa rested her head against his chest. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else just saw a woman trying to do a man's job. Thank you for valuing my work and my dreams. Thank you for riding back from Texas as fast as you could. Thank you for being exactly who you are, too. They stood there in the fading light, two people who had found each other against all odds in a small Kansas town on the edge of the frontier, and both of them knew that something important had begun, something that would shape both their lives in ways they could not yet imagine, something worth building, worth fighting for, worth every bit of effort it would take to make it real. Nathan started building the next morning, and Theresa came out to the property to see it for the first time. She stood on the small rise where the house would go and looked out over the rolling grassland, the creek winding through the cottonwoods, the wide Kansas sky overhead. And Nathan watched her face carefully, hoping she would love it as much as he did. "It is beautiful," she said finally. "I can see why you wanted this place. There is something peaceful about it, something that feels like possibility." "That is exactly what I thought when I first saw it," Nathan said, relieved and happy. "I know it is rough now, but I can see what it could become. Cattle grazing on that hillside, horses in the paddock, gardens near the house, maybe some chickens and pigs, a real working ranch. And a forge," Theresa added with a smile. "You promised me room for a workshop." "And a forge," Nathan agreed. "The best forge in 3 counties, for the best blacksmith in 3 counties. They spent the morning marking out where the house and barn would go, where the corrals and outbuildings should be placed, where Theresa's workshop would sit close enough to the house to be convenient, but far enough away that the noise and smoke would not be a bother. Nathan had basic carpentry skills from his years working ranches, but he knew his limitations. He would need to hire help for some of the more complex work, and Theresa suggested a man named William Carter, who did construction work around Wichita and had a reputation for quality and honesty. "He built the new church steeple last year," Theresa said, "and I have made hardware for several of his projects. He is a good man, fair in his dealings, and he employs a crew of skilled carpenters. He is also one of the few men in town who treats me with respect and pays me what my work is worth." Nathan hired William Carter that afternoon, and within 3 days they had a crew of 5 men working on the property. Nathan worked alongside them, learning as he went, and by the end of the first week, they had lumber delivered and foundation posts set for both the house and barn. It was hard, physical labor that left Nathan exhausted at the end of each day. But it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from building instead of just drifting. Theresa came out to the property every evening after finishing her own work in town, bringing food she had prepared and staying to watch the progress. Sometimes she would pitch in, helping to lift beams or hold boards steady while Nathan nailed them in place. Other times she would just sit on a stack of lumber and sketch designs for the metal work they would need. And every evening, before she rode back to town, Nathan would kiss her goodbye and count the days until they could stop saying goodbye at all. The house took shape slowly but surely over the following weeks. William Carter and his crew were skilled workers who did not cut corners, and Nathan appreciated the quality even as he chafed at how long everything took. The frame went up first, solid timber that would stand against prairie winds and summer storms. Then came the walls and the roof, and finally the interior work that would turn the structure into a real home. Nathan designed the house with Theresa's input, making sure it had everything they would need. A large main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a cast iron stove and plenty of workspace, 2 bedrooms for now, with the possibility of adding more later, and a covered porch that faced east so they could watch the sunrise with their morning coffee. It was bigger than anything Nathan had ever lived in, and every nail he drove felt like he was hammering his own stake into the ground, claiming a piece of the world as his own. The barn went up alongside the house, a sturdy structure with stalls for horses, room for hay storage, and a loft that could serve multiple purposes. Nathan also built a small bunkhouse for any hired hands he might employ in the future, though for now he would be working the ranch alone. Theresa's forge building came last, and Nathan made sure it was positioned perfectly, with good ventilation and plenty of space for her anvil, furnace, and all the tools of her trade. "You are building me a better workshop than I have now," Theresa said, walking through the structure while it was still just a frame. "This is going to be wonderful." "You deserve wonderful," Nathan said simply. "And I want you to have everything you need to do your best work. This ranch is going to depend on good metal work, which means it is going to depend on you." By mid-July, the house was finished enough to be livable, and Nathan spent his first night there alone, lying on a bedroll in the empty main room and listening to the wind whisper across the prairie. The space felt too big, too empty without Theresa there, and he found himself counting the days until she would be there permanently. He had already spoken to Reverend Matthews about performing the ceremony, and the Reverend had agreed readily, especially after his wife praised the beautiful hinges Theresa had made for the church doors. "Any woman who can create such fine work deserves respect and support," Reverend Matthews had said, "and any man who recognizes her value is wise beyond his years. I will be honored to marry you both." Nathan rode into town the next morning and found Theresa at her forge, working on a complex gate latch system. She looked up when he entered and set down her tools immediately. "The house is done," Nathan said without preamble. "Not perfect, not completely finished, but livable. Which means I want to marry you as soon as possible. This weekend, if you are willing. I do not want to spend another night in that house without you." Theresa's face broke into a radiant smile. "This weekend is perfect. I am ready. I have been ready." They were married 3 days later, on a Sunday morning, in the small white church at the center of Wichita. Theresa wore a simple dress in pale yellow that she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair that Nathan had picked that morning. Nathan wore his best clothes, freshly washed and pressed, and tried not to fidget nervously while waiting for the ceremony to begin. William Carter stood up as his witness, and Sarah Kemp stood up for Theresa, and the small church was perhaps a quarter full, with people who had come to see the wedding. When Reverend Matthews asked Nathan if he would take Theresa as his wife, he said, "I will," in a voice that rang clear and certain through the church. When the Reverend asked Theresa the same question, she said, "I will," with tears streaming down her face, and a smile that could have lit up the darkest night. They exchanged simple gold bands that Theresa had forged herself, each one smooth and perfect and sized exactly right. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews said, and Nathan did, pulling Theresa close and kissing her in front of God and the whole town, making a promise that went deeper than words ever could. Afterward, there was a small gathering at Sarah Kemp's restaurant with food and drink and well wishes from the assembled guests. Even Jeremiah showed up, his hands shaking but his smile genuine, and he told Theresa that he was proud of her and that her father would have been proud too. "You are doing what he dreamed of," the old blacksmith said. "Building a life around the craft, making a place for yourself. Do not ever let anyone tell you that you are not good enough. You hear me?" "I hear you," Theresa said, hugging the old man carefully. "Thank you for saying that." By mid-afternoon, Nathan and Theresa were riding out to the ranch together, all of Theresa's possessions packed on a wagon that William Carter had volunteered to drive for them. It was not much, just her tools and equipment from the forge, a few pieces of furniture, some clothes and personal items. But it was enough. Everything that mattered was sitting beside Nathan on the wagon seat, her hand in his, her face turned toward the future they would build together. When they arrived at the ranch, Nathan lifted Theresa down from the wagon, and then, in a gesture that was both traditional and heartfelt, he picked her up and carried her across the threshold of their new home. She laughed and threw her arms around his neck, and when he set her down in the main room, she kissed him long and deep. "Welcome home, Mrs. Wyatt," Nathan said when they finally broke apart. "Welcome home, Mr. Wyatt," Theresa replied. "Now show me everything." He gave her a complete tour of the house, pointing out details he had included specifically for her. The kitchen workspace was larger than standard, with hooks already installed for hanging pots and utensils, all forged by Theresa herself from her drawings. The bedroom had windows facing east for morning light and west for evening breezes. The porch had a bench where they could sit together and watch the sunset. Every detail had been considered, every choice made with their future in mind. After the house, he showed her the forge building, and Theresa walked through it with wonder on her face. "This is perfect," she said, running her hands over the sturdy workbench Nathan had built. "Better than perfect. I can do such good work here." "That is the idea," Nathan said. "I want you to be happy here, Theresa. I want this to be a place where you can thrive, not just survive." She turned to him with those honey-colored eyes full of love and promise. "I am already happy, Nathan, happier than I ever thought I could be. You gave me something I never expected to find, especially not out here on the frontier." "What is that?" "A partner," she said simply. "Someone who sees me as an equal, who values what I can do, who wants to build something with me instead of just expecting me to fit into what he builds. That is rarer than gold and more valuable than any amount of money." Nathan pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "You gave me something just as valuable, a home, a purpose, a future worth working toward. Before I met you, I was just drifting, doing jobs and moving on, never really connecting to anything or anyone. Now I have roots. Now I have a reason to build something that will last." They stood there in the forge building, while the afternoon light slanted through the windows, two people who had found each other against all odds and were determined to make something beautiful from the raw materials of their lives. That night, they christened their new home properly, and Nathan learned that Theresa approached lovemaking with the same passionate intensity she brought to her blacksmithing work. She was bold and generous and utterly without shame, and Nathan felt blessed beyond measure to have found her. The months that followed were filled with work and joy in equal measure. Nathan bought his first cattle in August, a small herd of 50 head that he purchased from a rancher outside of Dodge City. He spent 2 weeks driving them back to the Circle W, and when he arrived home, dusty and exhausted, Theresa had dinner waiting and a hot bath prepared and a warm bed ready for him to collapse into. The cattle settled onto the land well, grazing on the rich prairie grass and drinking from the creek, and Nathan felt a deep satisfaction every time he rode out to check on them. Theresa established her forge at the ranch, but also maintained a presence in Wichita, spending 2 days a week in town, taking commissions and doing repairs. Word had spread about her skill, and more people were willing to give her a chance now that she was a respectable married woman, instead of a single female blacksmith living alone. Nathan found this infuriating, but Theresa took a more pragmatic view. "I do not care why they hire me as long as they pay me fairly and let me do good work," she said. "Pride is a luxury I cannot afford right now. We need to build up capital, establish the ranch, make sure we have a financial foundation. If that means swallowing my pride and accepting commissions from men who would not have hired me 6 months ago, then that is what I will do." Nathan could not argue with her logic, even if he wanted to tell every man in Wichita exactly what he thought of their narrow-mindedness. Instead, he focused on building the ranch into something sustainable and profitable. He hired 2 ranch hands in September, young men named Charlie and Marcus, who were eager to learn and willing to work hard. He bought more cattle, slowly building the herd. He improved the property with better fencing, water troughs, and a windmill to pump water from a well he had drilled near the barn. Theresa did all the metalwork for these improvements, and her craftsmanship was evident in every piece. The gate hinges swung smoothly and never sagged. The latches were sturdy and reliable. The brackets and supports were positioned perfectly and built to last. Nathan heard more than one visitor to the ranch comment on the quality of the hardware, and he always made sure to tell them that his wife had forged every piece. By October, the ranch was running smoothly enough that Nathan could afford to take a Sunday off, and he and Theresa rode into Wichita for church and lunch afterward. They were walking down Main Street when they encountered a group of men standing outside one of the saloons, and Nathan recognized one of them as George Patterson, a cattle buyer who had a reputation for sharp dealing and sharper opinions. "Well, if it is not Wyatt and his blacksmith bride," Patterson said loudly, and his tone was not friendly. "Tell me, Wyatt, what is it like being married to a woman who spends all day doing man's work? Does she wear the pants in the family?" Nathan felt his jaw clench, but before he could respond, Theresa stepped forward. "What is it like being a man who thinks work has a gender, Mr. Patterson? I imagine it must be exhausting maintaining such limited thinking." Patterson's face flushed red. "You watch your mouth, woman. Just because you swing a hammer does not mean you can talk to men however you please. Actually, being a skilled craftsman who does quality work that you probably could not match even if you tried does mean I can talk to anyone however I please," Theresa said calmly, "especially when that person insults both me and my husband for no reason other than his own small-mindedness." "Why, you little—" Patterson started forward, but Nathan moved between him and Theresa in one smooth motion. "You need to walk away now," Nathan said quietly, and there was steel in his voice. "You insult my wife again. You even look at her wrong, and we are going to have a serious problem. The kind of problem that ends with you picking yourself up out of the dirt." Patterson looked at Nathan's face and apparently saw something there that made him reconsider. He stepped back, hands raised. "No need for trouble. I was just making conversation." "No, you were being an ignorant fool," Nathan said flatly. "And you were doing it in front of witnesses, which makes you a stupid, ignorant fool. Now, apologize to my wife and then go about your business." "I am not apologizing to—" "Apologize. Nathan said again, and this time his hand moved to rest on the grip of the pistol he wore at his hip. Or we can settle this another way. Your choice. Patterson looked at the gun, then at Nathan's face, then at Theresa, who stood with her arms crossed and her chin raised defiantly. Finally he muttered, "My apologies, Mrs. Wyatt. I spoke out of turn." "Apology noted if not accepted," Theresa said coolly. "Perhaps in the future you could try keeping your outdated opinions to yourself." Patterson and his companions moved off down the street, and Nathan turned to Theresa. "You all right?" "I am fine. Thank you for defending me, though I was doing a pretty good job myself." "You were magnificent," Nathan said honestly. "I was about 2 seconds from hitting him, but you handled it better with words than I ever could have with fists." Theresa took his arm, and they continued walking. "I have been dealing with men like Patterson my whole life. They think because I am a woman, I should be submissive and quiet and grateful for whatever scraps they throw my way. But my father raised me to speak up for myself, to stand proud in my skills, to never let anyone make me feel less than I am. I am not going to stop doing that just because some cattle buyer thinks women should stay in the kitchen." "Good," Nathan said firmly. "And if any of them ever give you real trouble, you let me know. I will not stand for anyone treating you with disrespect. I know you will not. That is one of the many reasons I love you." They walked on through town, hand in hand, and Nathan felt a fierce pride in the woman beside him. She was strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength, courageous in ways that went deeper than facing down danger. She lived her life on her own terms and refused to be diminished by other people's narrow thinking. And she was his wife, his partner, his equal in every way that mattered. Winter came to Kansas with cold winds and occasional snow, and Nathan and Theresa settled into the rhythms of ranch life. The cattle had to be checked daily. Water troughs had to be kept from freezing. Hay had to be distributed when the grass was covered by snow. It was hard work, especially during the bitter cold snaps that came in January and February, but Nathan thrived on it. This was his land, his herd, his responsibility. Everything he did mattered in immediate and tangible ways. Theresa split her time between the ranch forge and her work in Wichita. Though she spent more time at home during the worst of the winter weather, she worked on commissions in the forge Nathan had built for her, creating everything from decorative ironwork to practical tools and hardware. Her reputation continued to grow, and by spring, she was turning down jobs because she had more work than she could handle alone. "I need to hire an apprentice," she told Nathan one evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. "Someone who can help with the basic work so I can focus on the more complex commissions. But I do not know if I can find anyone willing to learn from a woman." "What about someone young enough not to have those prejudices yet?" Nathan suggested. "A boy who just wants to learn the craft and does not care who teaches him?" Theresa considered this. "That could work. Do you know anyone who might be interested?" As it turned out, Charlie, one of the ranch hands, had a younger brother named Thomas who was 16 and looking for an apprenticeship. Charlie brought the boy to meet Theresa, and she spent an hour testing him, showing him basic techniques and watching how he responded. Thomas was eager and attentive, with steady hands and a willingness to take instruction. And by the end of the hour, Theresa had made her decision. "I will take you on as an apprentice," she told Thomas. "You will work 6 days a week, learning the trade from the ground up. The first year will be mostly basic work, pumping bellows, cleaning tools, organizing materials. The second year, you will start learning actual forging techniques. By the third year, if you have the skill, you will be doing real work under my supervision. I will pay you a fair wage that will increase as your skills improve. In exchange, you will work hard, pay attention, and never disrespect me or question my authority just because I am a woman. Do we have an understanding?" Thomas nodded eagerly. "Yes, madam, Mrs. Wyatt. I will work hard, I promise. I have seen the hinges you made for the church, and the gate at the Morrison place, and all the hardware here at the ranch. If I can learn to do work like that, I will count myself lucky." "Good answer," Theresa said with a smile. "You start Monday morning. Be here at 6 o'clock sharp, ready to work." Having Thomas as an apprentice changed things for Theresa in ways she had not anticipated. She was a good teacher, patient, and clear in her explanations, and Thomas was a dedicated student who soaked up knowledge like dry earth soaking up rain. Within 6 months, he was handling basic forging tasks competently, and Theresa found herself with more time to focus on the complex artistic work she enjoyed most. She took on a commission from the mayor of Wichita to create decorative railings for the new town hall, and the finished work was so beautiful that people came from neighboring towns just to see it. She forged a set of custom gates for a wealthy rancher near Dodge City, with intricate designs of cattle and horses worked into the iron. She made tools and hardware for farmers and ranchers across 3 counties, and every piece bore the mark of her exceptional craftsmanship. Nathan watched his wife's success with deep pride and satisfaction. He had always known she was talented, but seeing the rest of the world finally recognize that talent was gratifying in ways he could not quite put into words, and the money she earned from her commissions helped build the Circle W into a truly successful operation. By the summer of 1877, just over a year after they had married, the ranch had a herd of 200 cattle, 8 horses, and employed 4 full-time ranch hands in addition to Theresa's apprentice. It was in August of that year that Theresa told Nathan she was pregnant. They were sitting together on the porch after supper, watching the last light fade from the sky, when she took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "There is someone new who is going to be joining our family," she said quietly. "Around February, if the doctor's calculations are correct." Nathan felt his breath catch in his throat. "You are sure?" "I am sure. I have suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to wait until I was certain before I told you. Are you happy?" Happy seemed like too small a word for what Nathan was feeling. Overwhelmed, terrified, elated, blessed, all of those and more. "I am beyond happy," he managed finally. "I am... Theresa, we are going to have a baby. We are going to be parents. I can barely believe it." She laughed, a sound full of joy and nervousness. "I can barely believe it either. I never really thought about having children before, never let myself imagine what that might be like. I was too focused on just surviving, on establishing myself as a blacksmith, on proving I could make my own way. But now I cannot stop thinking about it. A little person who is part you and part me, our child." Nathan pulled her close, holding her carefully as if she might break. "You are going to be an amazing mother." "I hope so. I have no idea what I'm doing. Neither do I, but we will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Theresa continued working at her forge well into her 6th month, much to the scandalized horror of some of the town women. She finally agreed to take on less physically demanding work when Nathan pointed out that he would really prefer she not go into labor while holding a red-hot piece of iron. Thomas proved capable of handling most of the basic commissions under her supervision, and Theresa focused on design work and finishing touches while her apprentice did the heavy forging. Nathan was protective, bordering on obsessive during those months, constantly worrying about Theresa's health and the baby's well-being. He made sure she ate enough, rested enough, did not push herself too hard. Theresa tolerated his fussing with good humor, though she did inform him that she was pregnant, not made of glass, and perfectly capable of knowing her own limits. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him, "and most of them managed without their husbands hovering like mother hens." "Most of them were not married to me," Nathan replied, "and most of them were not carrying my child. So, you are going to have to tolerate my hovering, because I refuse to apologize for caring about you and our baby." She kissed him then, soft and sweet. "I love that you care. Just try to remember that I am strong, and I know what I am doing, and everything is going to be fine." And it was fine, right up until it was not. The baby came early, in the middle of a February snowstorm that blanketed the prairie in white and made travel nearly impossible. Nathan sent Charlie riding into town for the doctor, but the snow was too deep and the wind too fierce. Charlie came back 3 hours later, half frozen, with word that the doctor could not make it out to the ranch until the storm broke. "There is a midwife, though," Charlie said, his teeth chattering. "Sarah Kemp said she has delivered more than 30 babies and never lost a mother or child. She is willing to come if we can get her here safely." "Then we get her here," Nathan said firmly. "Hitch up the big wagon with the draft horses. Load it with blankets and hot bricks for warmth. I will go with you." Theresa grabbed his arm. "Nathan, you cannot go out in that storm. It is too dangerous." "Not as dangerous as you trying to deliver this baby without help," Nathan said. "I am going, and that is final. You just focus on staying calm and breathing like Sarah taught you. I will be back with the midwife as fast as I can." The ride into town was harrowing, with snow so thick they could barely see 10 feet ahead and wind that tried to push the wagon off the road. But Nathan and Charlie made it there and back, with Sarah Kemp huddled under blankets in the wagon bed. And by the time they reached the ranch, Theresa's contractions were coming hard and fast. Sarah took over with the calm competence of long experience, shooing Nathan out of the bedroom and setting to work. Marcus boiled water, Charlie kept the fire roaring in the fireplace, and Nathan paced the main room like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from behind the closed bedroom door. The labor lasted 7 hours, and Nathan lived every one of those hours in an agony of fear and helplessness. Finally, as dawn was breaking and the storm was beginning to ease, he heard the sound he had been waiting for. A baby's cry, thin and reedy, but unmistakably alive. The bedroom door opened and Sarah emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy with a good strong cry and all his fingers and toes. Your wife is tired but doing well. You can go in now?" Nathan was through the door before Sarah finished speaking. Theresa lay in their bed, pale and exhausted, but with a smile on her face that made Nathan's heart turn over in his chest. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket Theresa had stitched herself, was the smallest human being Nathan had ever seen. "Come meet your son," Theresa said softly. Nathan approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny features that looked impossibly delicate. His eyes were closed, and one miniature hand had worked free of the blanket, fingers curled into a fist no bigger than a walnut. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly soft cheek. "Absolutely perfect, just like his mother." "We did pretty well, I think," Theresa said, her voice heavy with fatigue. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but never quite decided on anything. Now, looking at his son's face, Nathan knew exactly what felt right. "What about Samuel, after my brother, if that is all right with you?" Tears welled up in Theresa's eyes. "Samuel Wyatt, I think that is perfect. Your brother would be honored." Nathan carefully sat down on the edge of the bed, and Theresa shifted the baby so Nathan could hold him for the first time. The tiny weight in his arms was terrifying and wonderful and absolutely overwhelming. This was his son, his child, a brand new life that he and Theresa had created together, and for whom they were now responsible. "Hello, Samuel," Nathan said quietly. "I am your father, and I promise you that I am going to do everything in my power to give you a good life, a safe life, a happy life, a life full of love and opportunity. I am going to teach you to ride and rope and work cattle. Your mother is going to teach you about hard work and persistence and standing up for what is right. And together, we are going to make sure you know every single day how much you are loved." The baby made a small sound, and his eyes opened briefly, unfocused but seeming to look right at Nathan. Then he yawned, a yawn so tiny it was almost comical, and settled back into sleep. Nathan looked at Theresa and found her watching him with so much love in her eyes that it almost hurt. "We really did it," he said. "We built a life together, a real life, with a home and work we love and now a child. 2 years ago, I was just a drifter with nothing but a horse and a dream. And now, look at us." "Look at us," Theresa agreed. "We are pretty amazing, if I say so myself." "You are amazing," Nathan corrected. "I am just lucky enough to be along for the ride." "We are both lucky," Theresa said. "We found each other when we both needed someone to believe in, and we built something that will last, Nathan. Something our son will be proud of when he is grown. That Forge song you heard that first morning, that was just the beginning. We are going to make so much more music together." Nathan leaned down carefully and kissed her, mindful of the baby sleeping in his arms. "I love you, Theresa Wyatt, more than I ever knew it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too, Nathan Wyatt. Now go show off our son to everyone who helped bring him into the world, and then let me sleep. I am exhausted." Nathan carefully transferred the baby back to Theresa's arms, then went out to the main room, where Sarah, Charlie, and Marcus were waiting anxiously. "It is a boy," he announced, and could not keep the huge grin off his face. "Samuel Nathan Wyatt, and he is absolutely perfect." There was much celebration after that, with Sarah staying to make sure both mother and baby were truly all right, and the ranch hands congratulating Nathan with enthusiasm. When the storm finally broke and Charlie rode into town to spread the news, Word came back that half of Wichita was celebrating the birth, including Reverend Matthews, who said he looked forward to baptizing young Samuel just as soon as Theresa was recovered enough to travel. The months that followed were simultaneously exhausting and wonderful. Nathan discovered that babies required constant attention, rarely slept for more than 2 hours at a stretch, and produced a truly astonishing amount of laundry. He also discovered that he did not mind any of it, that watching his son grow and change day by day was fascinating beyond measure. Samuel was a good baby, healthy and alert, with his mother's curious nature and his father's stubbornness. Theresa went back to work at the forge when Samuel was 3 months old, though at a reduced pace. She had rigged up a clever cradle near her workbench where Samuel could sleep or watch while she worked on less dangerous tasks. Thomas had progressed to the point where he could handle most of the basic forging, and Theresa focused on design work and supervision while balancing motherhood with her craft. "People said I would have to give up blacksmithing once I became a mother," she told Nathan one evening while nursing Samuel. "They said I could not possibly do both, that I would have to choose between my work and my child. But they were wrong. It is harder, yes, and I have to be more organized and more careful. But I refuse to give up something that is so fundamental to who I am. Samuel is going to grow up knowing that his mother is a skilled craftsman, that women can do anything men can do, that work and family are not mutually exclusive. He is lucky to have you as a mother," Nathan said, "both for the love you give him and for the example you set. He is going to grow up understanding that people should be judged by their character and skills, not by their gender or any other arbitrary characteristic." The Circle W Ranch continued to prosper over the following years. The cattle herd grew to over 400 head, and Nathan hired additional ranch hands to help manage them. He bought more land, expanding the property to nearly 300 acres. He built additional outbuildings, improved the irrigation system, and established the Circle W as one of the most successful ranches in the region. Theresa's reputation as a blacksmith spread far beyond Wichita. She took on apprentices beyond Thomas, training young people in the craft regardless of their gender, and her forge became known as one of the best places to learn metalworking in Kansas. She created pieces that were both functional and artistic, and her work was featured in newspapers as far away as Kansas City and St. Louis. She never forgot what it had been like to be dismissed and undervalued because of her gender, and she made sure to support other women who were trying to establish themselves in traditionally male fields. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic child who loved following his father around the ranch and watching his mother work at the forge. By the time he was 4 years old, he could identify different types of metal by sight and knew the names of every tool in the forge. He learned to ride a horse before he could read, and he helped feed the chickens and collect eggs with serious concentration that made both his parents smile. In the spring of 1881, Theresa told Nathan she was pregnant again, and their daughter Elizabeth was born that December in much easier circumstances than Samuel's birth. The delivery took place on a clear, cold night with the doctor in attendance, and Elizabeth came into the world with a lusty cry that suggested she had inherited her mother's determination. She had Theresa's auburn hair and Nathan's brown eyes, and Samuel was immediately smitten with his baby sister, wanting to hold her constantly and help with her care. The years passed in a blur of work and family and building. By 1885, the Circle W Ranch had become one of the most successful operations in Kansas, and Theresa's forge employed 5 full-time craftspeople and produced work that was sought after across the entire region. Samuel was 9 years old and already helping with ranch work, showing a natural talent for working with cattle and horses. Elizabeth was 4 and had her mother's fierce independence, insisting on doing everything herself, no matter how difficult. One evening in late summer, Nathan and Theresa sat on their porch watching the sunset, while Samuel and Elizabeth played in the yard. The house had been expanded twice over the years, and the property now included multiple outbuildings, extensive corrals, and Theresa's thriving forge operation. It barely resembled the empty prairie Nathan had first seen 9 years earlier. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Nathan asked, taking Theresa's hand. "When I rode up to that old forge with a lame horse and heard you making iron sing?" "All the time," Theresa said, leaning against his shoulder. "I think about how close I came to giving up and leaving Wichita. If you had not shown up when you did, if you had not valued my work and paid me fairly and seen me as something more than just a woman trying to do a man's job, I do not know if I would have had the strength to keep going." "You would have," Nathan said with certainty. "You are the strongest person I know, Theresa. You would have found a way." "Maybe, but I'm glad I did not have to find out. I'm glad you rode into my life and changed everything. You gave me so much more than just fair payment for shoeing your horse. You gave me respect, partnership, love, a family. You helped me build something that matters." Nathan thought about everything they had accomplished together. The ranch that had grown from raw land into a thriving operation. The forge that had gone from a one-woman struggle to a respected business that trained the next generation of craftspeople. The children who were growing up strong and confident and loved. The life they had built together, piece by piece. Like Theresa building something beautiful and functional from raw iron. "We built it together," he said. "Everything we have, everything we are, it is because we found each other and refused to let anyone tell us we could not have what we wanted. You wanted to be a blacksmith who was valued for her skill. I wanted a home and a family and work that mattered. Together, we made both those dreams real." Theresa lifted her head and kissed him, soft and sweet and full of contentment. "Name your price. You're worth it. Do you remember saying that to me?" "Of course I remember. It was the truth then, and it is still the truth now. You are worth everything, Theresa Wyatt, everything and more. So are you, Nathan Wyatt, so are you." They sat together in the fading light, watching their children play and listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the evening. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the barn, the rhythmic clang of a hammer from the forge where one of Theresa's apprentices was finishing up the day's work. It was the music of a life well lived, of dreams achieved, of love given and received freely. Samuel came running up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Papa, can we go riding tomorrow? I want to check on that new calf in the north pasture." "We can do that," Nathan agreed. "Right after breakfast we will saddle up and ride out together." Elizabeth toddled up behind her brother, her face set in determined lines. "I come too." "You are too little," Samuel said dismissively, and Elizabeth's face immediately crumpled toward tears. "Now, Samuel," Theresa interjected, "your sister is not too little. She just needs a little extra help. Your father can ride with her, and you can ride on your own like the big boy you are." Samuel considered this, then nodded. "All right, but you have to promise not to cry if you get scared, Lizzie." "Not scared," Elizabeth declared firmly. "I brave." Nathan and Theresa exchanged smiles over the children's heads. "Yes, you are, sweetheart," Theresa said. "You are very brave, just like your papa and your brother and me." Later that night, after the children were asleep and Nathan and Theresa lay together in their bed, Nathan thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of drifting before he found Wichita. The sound of a hammer that had drawn him to an old forge and changed his life forever. The courage it had taken for Theresa to keep working when everyone told her she was wasting her time. The moment when he had offered her fair payment and seen the hope kindle in her eyes. "I would do it all again," he said into the darkness. "Every hardship, every struggle, every difficult moment. I would do it all again exactly the same way because it led me to you." Theresa's hand found his under the blankets. "So would I. I would go through all of it again, all the rejection and doubt and pain, because it brought me here to this moment, to this life, this family, this love." They lay together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last generations. Outside, the Kansas wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the scent of grass and cattle and the promise of tomorrow. In the forge building, the last embers of the day's fire glowed softly, waiting to be awakened into flame again when the sun rose. And in the house Nathan had built and Theresa had made into a home, their children slept peacefully, dreaming dreams that would someday become their own stories of courage and persistence and love found in unexpected places. The story that had begun with the sound of a hammer striking an anvil had become a symphony, and it would echo across the years long after both Nathan and Theresa were gone. But that was far in the future. For now, they had each other. They had their children. They had work they loved and a life they had built together. They had everything that mattered, and as Nathan drifted off to sleep with his wife in his arms and his children safe under his roof, he thought about that first morning when he had heard the hammer song and followed it to the woman who would become his everything. He thought about how she could forge iron better than any blacksmith he had ever known, and how he had said, "Name your price, you're worth it," without having any idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. She had been worth it, worth every moment, every effort, every risk. And he had spent nearly a decade proving that to her day after day, just as she had proven her worth to him and to everyone else who had ever doubted her. Together, they had forged something stronger than iron, something that would endure long after steel rusted and buildings crumbled. They had forged a love that would last forever, and a legacy that would live on in their children and their children's children, a testament to what was possible when two people found each other at exactly the right moment and had the courage to build something beautiful together. The hammer had sung on that spring morning in 1876, and its echo would resound through all the years to come. A reminder that the best things in life are forged through hard work, patience, skill, and love, and that sometimes the most valuable thing a person can do is recognize quality when they see it and be willing to pay what it is truly worth. Nathan Wyatt had recognized Theresa Pritchard's worth from the very beginning, and she had recognized his in turn. Together, they had created something extraordinary from the raw materials of hope and determination and love. And as the Kansas stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind sang its endless song, the Circle W Ranch stood as proof that dreams could become reality when two people worked together toward a common goal. The forge was silent now, its work done for the day. But tomorrow it would sing again, and the day after that, and the day after that. Just as the ranch would continue to thrive, and the children would continue to grow, and Nathan and Theresa would continue to build their life together, one day at a time, one moment at a time, one hammer strike at a time. And that was exactly as it should be, because the best stories never really end. They just keep unfolding, chapter after chapter, year after year, generation after generation. The story of Nathan and Theresa Wyatt was one such story, a tale of love and perseverance, and two people who refused to let the world tell them what they could or could not be. They had forged their own path, together, and it had led them to everything they had ever wanted and more. And when their grandchildren asked them years later how they had built such a wonderful life, Nathan and Theresa would smile at each other and tell them the truth. It all started with the sound of a hammer and a cowboy who was willing to pay what good work was worth. Everything else had followed from that single moment of recognition and respect, and it had been more than enough to build a lifetime of love upon, more than enough to create a legacy that would endure, more than enough to prove that when two people truly see each other, truly value each other, truly commit to building something together, there is nothing they cannot accomplish. The prairie wind continued its song, the stars continued their ancient dance, and in the house on the Circle W Ranch, Nathan and Theresa Wyatt slept peacefully, surrounded by everything they had built and everything that mattered. Their story had begun with iron and fire, with skill and determination, with a simple transaction that had become so much more. And it would continue, day after day, year after year, a testament to the power of love and partnership, and two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and made the most of every moment after. The hammer had sung its song, and they had answered with a life well lived, a love well earned, and a future full of promise. That was all anyone could ask for, and more than most people ever found. But Nathan and Theresa Wyatt had found it together, forged it together from the raw materials of hope and hard work and unwavering faith in each other. And that made all the difference in the world.